Well, good morning. Hey, I want to invite you to turn your Bibles to Matthew 22. Real quick, Pastor Matt, come back out here, man, because I got to show honor where honor is due. And you brought such a great word last week. Did you guys hear it? If you guys were here, man, it was such a good word. I was thinking about it a lot this week. And so I just wanted to give you honor. Thank you for what you brought. If you didn't watch it or you didn't see it, watch it online. It's a really, really, really good word. So thank you for that word, all your preparation, man. It was just awesome. Thanks for leading us in worship today, too, man. Started to lose my voice a few minutes ago. I was like, man, this is good. I want to invite you. So Matthew chapter 22, and we're in this series called The Ways of Jesus. And this last week, something unique happened. Sunday after church, we had a great start party, and we had just this awesome time together, and it was just a powerful service. And I left church just fired up. Do you ever have one of those Sundays where you're like, man, I'm just fired up. I'm ready to go. I left church feeling that. And Pastor Matt actually had given me this new pre-workout. I'm like, hey, it's a great day to try this pre-workout. And so I took this pre-workout, and I go to the gym, and I'm feeling good. And it's shoulder day. I like shoulder day. I'm like, I'm gonna go for it today. And I just went all out. I mean, every bit of what I had, I left at the gym. I felt great, got home, and got into bed later that night feeling good. And then I woke up at like 12:30. Suddenly I'm reminded of my age. And I'm like, what in the world? Why am I in so much pain? And my wife goes, are you okay, babe? I'm like, babe, I'm in serious, like I did something. I pulled something in like a lat or a clavicle or something in here or back here or something. I did something. And I said, she goes, it's okay. She goes, I got this anti-inflammatory medication last week. Let me give you one. I'm like, that's great. Thank you. And so I took the pill. And I'm like most of you, I don't need water. I don't need, anything it's just a pill. I take the pill, and it's the worst pill I've ever tasted in my life. Like, what is this? And she goes, oh, it's just, I said, I need some water. This is so bad. She's like, you're being a baby. You're being such a baby. Get over it. I'm like, no, this tastes awful. Babe, give me something. And so she gets some water, and I take the water. I go back to sleep. And the next morning, I wake up. I wake up an hour and a half after my alarm. Normally, I'm one of those people, I wake up in the morning, I just hit the ground running, right? Like if you remember that scene in Dark Knight when he wakes up and he's doing push-ups, and then Alfred, the cheeky butler, brings him this like green drink. That's me in the morning, except for I don't have a cheeky butler, and I hit the ground running, right? And I wake up at 8 o'clock, which is late for me, and I tell my wife, I said, I think I need to sleep for 15 more minutes. She just looks at me like, what is wrong with you today? Like, something is off. And I had to run some errands that morning, and I come home, and I'm bringing the car back to my wife, and she's like, how you feeling? I said, I feel off. Like something is off. Like I don't feel myself. I was talking to people, and they said you sounded weird, and she goes, well, I failed you. I said, what do you mean you failed me? She goes, I drugged you. I go, what? She goes, last night, I got the dog's anxiety medication, and I accidentally gave it to you. I said, what? She goes, I'm really sorry. She goes, this morning I went to take that anti-inflammatory, and I realized I had given you the dog's anti-anxiety medication when we were grooming him, and I thought, oh my gosh, no wonder. I just thought something was seriously wrong with me. Most of us do not want to admit that we failed, right? Like we don't like to admit failure. Thomas Edison said it like this. He goes, I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. We don't like to admit our failures, but when we do, when we admit those failures, we are on the road to redemption and reconciliation and breakthrough. Today, I want to look at one of the most famous failures in all of history. And if you're taking notes today, the title of this message is How to Face Jesus After Failure. You might be here today, you might be here online, and you're saying, man, this is for me. This is for you. It's for every one of us. How to face Jesus after failure. Let's pick it up in Matthew chapter 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. You got to catch this real quick. 2,000 years ago. I mean, this conversation was happening over 2,000 years ago. And isn't it interesting that humans have not changed that much? Like, we're still doing this today, right? We're still trying to compare people to other people. We're still thinking, oh, I got to be more like so-and-so. I got to be more like so. They did this to Jesus. It's not just to you and me. They did this to Jesus, and things have not changed over 2,000 years. Then he asked them, but who do you say I am? See, the question was not that Jesus was struggling with his own identity. He wanted these followers to know who he was. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Then Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from a human being. Now I say that you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. This proclamation from Peter, it changes everything for him. In this moment, Peter understands Jesus' identity. He comes to this place, he says, Jesus, this is who you are. You're the Messiah, you're the Son of God. And this declaration, this statement, it just changes the outcome of Peter's life. Jesus reveals who Peter is. He reveals Peter's identity to Peter in this moment. He says, Peter, this is who you are. And here's what we have to see. It's not until we can answer this question of who is God that we can understand who we are. You see, we try to find our identity outside of God, and it leads us on a whole bunch of rabbit trails that can cost us decades of our lives. But when we come to this reality of who God is, who he says he is, then our identity comes into place. You cannot discover the person you were created to be until you discover the one who created you. Come on, I don't think you're hearing me, because right now you'd be making a whole lot of noise right back at me. Right now you'd be like, man, that is truth. You'd be writing this down, you'd be tweeting it out or threading it or whatever kids are doing these days. You will be getting it. That until we come to this reality, that we know who God is and we understand who he is, then our identity comes into place after it. Psalms 139, it says it like this. It says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. David, the author of this, he got it. Just like Peter, he understood who he was. He says, listen, I'm praising you, God, because you made me. You made me perfectly. You made me wonderfully made. You cannot find your identity until you find Jesus. That's the bottom line. That is the reality. The world is looking for their identity. They're looking for their identity in all kinds of things. They're looking for it in politics. They're looking for it in sexuality. They're looking for it in the cars they drive and in all kinds of different things. And God would say to us, your identity is found in Jesus. When you find Jesus, then you find your identity. Then you find him. Peter knew it. He says, Jesus, you're not just a man. You're the Messiah. Jesus, you're not just a teacher. You're the Lord. You're not just a prophet. You're the Prince of Peace. You're not just a good person. You're God. See, when we come to this revelation, we find a new identification. When we come to the revelation of who God is, we find a new identification. In a world that would say, I identify as this, I identify as that, Jesus says, but I'm inviting you to an identity found in me. I created you. So we can identify as followers of Jesus, as sons of God, as daughters of God. That's what we identify as. That is our greatest point of identity. Before I can ever become a father, I have to realize that I'm a son. Before I can ever be a husband, I have to realize that I'm part of the church, part of the bride of Christ. Before I can ever be a pastor and a leader, I have to first be a follower of Jesus. Every area of my life, every area of your life comes back to that identity of who we are in God. And when we get that, it changes everything. Friday night, I was hanging out with some friends, and we were talking about when we were growing up. And, we're all raising kids in the same season of life, and we're having this great conversation. And they said, where was this moment for you that like, you just knew, like, things were going to be okay? And we were talking through all this stuff, and I said, I told them this story. I said, when I was 14 years old, I ended up swinging to varsity as a freshman. And I said, I remember this moment where I got invited to a party. I didn't know it was a party. I thought I was just going to dinner with some of the seniors, and they took me to this party. And we show up at this party, and it's at this hotel, and there's about 400 people. And one of my friends gets on a mic, and he goes, this is Ezra. He's 14. No one give him any alcohol. No one allow him. No girls are going to talk to him. Like just kind of put me in the friend zone with everybody, right? I was like, come on, man. Like, there were some cute girls there. And that night, I'm driving them home as the DD at 14. Mom and Dad, you didn't know about this till today. And this is always a great place to confess those kinds of things because I'm protected. I got a whole lot of witnesses right here. But that summer, I went to a summer camp. And I had an encounter with God. I had an experience with God. I didn't have it all right, but man, it shaped so many things for my life. It shaped so many things in my life. And I said, that's what helped me. I made a whole lot of mistakes. I made a whole lot of failures in my life. I'm still making them. But coming to that reality of this identity is that it just changes everything. Jesus says, Peter, I'm giving you a new name. Your name is Peter. Your name means rock. I'm not just giving you a new name. Peter, I'm giving you a new purpose, that I'm going to help build this church with you. I'm giving you a new promise as well, that the gates of hell itself will not stop you. When we come to this reality, this understanding of who Jesus is, he gives us a new identity. And we have not just a new name as Christians, we have a new identity, but we also have a new purpose and we have a new promise. And Peter finds that. He comes to this place and listen, he's got this new promise. And not even hell itself is going to stop what he's about to do. But how many of you know that with a new purpose and a new promise does not mean that we're still perfect? We're not perfect. Today, some of you might give your life to Jesus and you have this new purpose in your life. It still means that we're going to have days that are bad days. That we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have struggles. We're going to go through things. And Peter did. In other words, a revelation does not mean perfection. A revelation might mean a new identification, but it does not mean perfection. Fast forward to the hours before Jesus goes to the cross, and he's gathered his disciples for this final meal together, and it's called the Last Supper, and he's beginning to give them this instruction. He says, in just a little while, I'm gonna go, and he begins to walk this out. He says, one of you are gonna betray me. And this same man, Peter, goes, there's no way. There's no way, absolutely not. And Jesus turns to Peter and says, listen, Peter, before the rooster crows, before the alarms go off, before the sun rises, you're gonna deny me 3 times. Jesus calls out Peter on something he's about to do. And yet Jesus still allows him to sit at the table. That gives me a whole lot of hope. Because I'm still going to make mistakes, but guess what? I still have a seat at the table. You're going to still make mistakes, but guess what? You still have a seat at the table. So listen to this. Luke chapter 22. I want to pick it up in verse 54. This is just hours after the conversation. It says, so they arrested him, this is him being Jesus, and they led him to the high priest's home. And Peter followed at a distance. The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it. And Peter joined them there. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, this man was one of Jesus' followers. First time. But Peter denied it. Woman, he said, I don't even know him. Verse 58. After a while, someone else looked at him and said, you must be one of them. Second time, no man, I'm not, Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, this must be one of them, because he is a Galilean too. Then the third time, Peter said, man, I don't know what you're talking about. And immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me. And Peter left the courtyard, weeping bitterly. We all have failures. But I don't believe that all failures are equal. Today, you could break the law by speeding, and that's a little bit different than breaking the law by Grand Theft Auto, right? You're gonna get pulled over. You might get a ticket. If you're really good at talking your way out of it, you might get dismissed. You steal a car. You walk out of here and you're like, man, that's a good looking truck. I think I'm just gonna take it. Guess what? You're getting more than a ticket, right? All failures are not created equal. And on the scale of failures, Peter's failure is probably one of the absolute worst. One of the biggest failures he could ever make, he makes. Jesus needed him in this moment. The moment he needed him the most, Peter is failing Jesus. But guess what? Failure doesn't have to be terminal. Fast forward again. 50 days later, the believers have gathered. Jesus instructed them. He says, I want you to stay here in the city and wait for the gift my Father is going to send to you. Jesus has already gone to the cross. He's always resurrected from the grave, and he's ascended to heaven. So this time, they're doing what Jesus said to do, and they're waiting on God. They've gathered, and they're waiting, and God moves. He gives the gift promised, the gift of the Holy Spirit, the third part of the Trinity. And what happens? The Word of God tells us that they begin to speak in different languages. They're speaking in their spiritual language, but they begin to speak in different languages. And at the same time, there's this massive festival. Like, think ACL, right? But times 4. There's over a million plus people have gathered for this festival. And guess what happens? People from all over this region of the world hear the gospel in their own languages. These disciples, they don't speak these languages, but they start hearing the gospel, and what happens? Peter realizes there's a moment here, and he gets up, and he begins to preach. And that day, not like a month later or collectively over the weeks to come, that single day, 3,000 people give their life to Jesus. What happens? We just left a Peter that's denying Jesus. What happens? He goes from rejecting to accepting. What happens? He goes from passing off to proclaiming. What happens? He goes from abandoning to acknowledging, from denying to declaring. Here's what happened. Pick this up with me in John 21, verse 3. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. Guys, you just got an excuse. Just so you know, every single one of you guys have an excuse to go fishing this week. I just gave you that one. The disciples did it. It's a very spiritual thing to go fishing. We'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night, it caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, he's the author of this book, his name's John, said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. Then verse 15, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. Then the third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. This is key. What took Peter from a place of denying to preaching happened in this moment. Peter came face to face with his failure. He had an encounter with his failure. And what's happened? Jesus forgives him. But Jesus walks it out with him. There's always a price to pay for sin. And Jesus walks it out with him. He asks him 3 different times, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? That's his request. That's his question. That's what he comes back to Peter with. Peter, do you love me? And what happens? Peter's forgiven. And he's not just forgiven, he's reconciled, he's restored, he's redeemed. And that's what happens with forgiveness. With forgiveness, we always receive reconciliation. We always receive redemption. We always receive restoration. When we come into this place and we face our failures, we confess our sins. And oftentimes that's what a failure is. A failure is a sin. And we say, God, I'm sorry. And we give it to God and we trust God with it. We receive this forgiveness. Peter realized he had failed, but he also realized this. Jesus, who he'd been walking with for the last almost 3 years of his life, was a man of grace. And he had forgiven Peter. And he receives that. Here's the key. The key is that we own our failures, but we do not allow our failures to own us. That we own our failures. We own up to our failures. Man, I failed. My wife walking out the front door before I could even get out of the car saying, babe, I failed you. I gave you the dog's medication. And it's always a good time when you can laugh on the other side of a failure. You know that you're in a good place when you can laugh about it. But that we own our failures. That we deal with our failures. So my question for you today is, what are you doing with your failures? What are you doing with your failures? I think there's 3 things that we often do. There's 3 things that we often do. The first thing that we often do with our failures is we allow them to destroy us. The second thing that we do with our failures is that we dismiss them. I know I've done this before. Man, I didn't really, I made a mistake. I didn't really fail. Like I was in a bad spot. I was in a bad season. There was so much other things going on that and we dismiss it. What we need to do, the third thing that we need to do is we just need to deal with our failures. We need to deal with our failures. We don't dismiss them. We don't allow them to destroy us. We deal with our failures. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Ezra, how do I deal with failure? How do I deal with failure? There's no textbook on it. I'm so glad you asked. I want to look at 3 things as we conclude this morning. The first is this, is that your failures do not have to be fatal. Your failures do not have to be fatal. Ask for forgiveness. Receive grace. Get accountability. And then begin moving forward. It's that simple. It's that simple in our lives. We often think, man, in order to get right with God, in order to come back to church, then I just I gotta get all this stuff figured out. I gotta get all my ducks in a row. In order for me to join online, I gotta take all these steps, and then I can come to Jesus. Guess what? Jesus went to Peter. He showed up where Peter was fishing, and he met Peter in that moment. And guess what? He's done that for every single one of us. The cross brought us to a place where, man, when we messed up, Jesus said, I'm right here. You don't need to get it all figured out, get it all right, then come to me. I'm right here. When I was in college, I went through a season where I struggled with pornography. And it had me. I was losing the battle to pornography. I'm in Bible college, and I'm thinking, man, I'm training to be a pastor, and I'm struggling with this major sin in my life. And I went to one of the guys in our church, Justin. I said, man, I need accountability. And I read in the Bible that a cord of 3 is better than 2, and it can't be easily undone. I thought, okay, I need someone else. And so I got another friend. And I said, I need accountability in my life. And they said, there's this great software, and we all download the software together. And if I looked at anything sketcy at all, they got an email with every website I visited. Yeah. That accountability, that confession, it helped me overcome that. And there's no looking back. We went through that season. There was so much breakthrough, so much healing, so much deliverance. But it was because of the accountability, having other people in my life calling me, texting me, meeting with me once a week, saying, how are you doing with this? And help me to overcome it. We got to deal with it. We got to expose it to the light, right? Your failures don't have to be fatal. That would have been the end of me. That would have destroyed me. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for God's grace and those people in my life. It could have been fatal. It could have been final, but it doesn't have to be. God says it does not have to be. Find that accountability. This is why it's so important. If you're not in a group, get into a group. Ladies, we have groups on Monday nights and Thursday nights right now for you. Guys, we have groups right now on Thursday nights and Friday nights or Thursday mornings, and then we're going to start a whole bunch more in the fall. Get into a group, get accountability, overcome that together. God is the author and finisher of our faith. Confession is like reloading that ink in a pen that runs out, and it allows God to continue to write. He can't be writing anything when there's sin in our lives. Allow him to continue to write, confess those things to him. I love what Ralph Waldo Emerson said. I've never forgotten this. He said, the greatest glory in living lies not in never failing, but in rising every time we fail. It's like a fighter who gets knocked down and they get back up. I like those fights so much more because I can relate to those fights. Because I've never just been in life where I'm just standing there not taking any punches. Man, I take a lot of punches. I get knocked down. But you got to get back up. You got to keep going. Your failure does not need to be final. Listen to this. Your failure is a comma, not a period. Your failure is a comma, not a period. Here's the second thing. Your failures do not need to define you. Your failures do not need to define you. Someone needs to hear that today. You've been living with this identity that I'm a failure. You've been carrying this thing out. It separated you from your identity. And now it's time to say, you know what? That's not who I am. That's not who God made me to be and created me to be. I was made in the image of God. I'm not a failure. I might make some mistakes. I might have some failures along the way, but I'm not a mistake. I'm not a failure. John Maxwell said this. He said the difference between the average people and achieving people is their perception and response to failure. As I read this book, it's filled with broken, fragmented people that make all kinds of failures, and they get back up and they confess their sins and they receive grace and they keep going. This book is filled with people that make all kinds of mistakes, but their mistakes don't define them. Their grace does. God's love does. So you failed. I have too. Guess what? We're gonna probably do it again. Unless Jesus comes back in like 5 seconds, we're gonna do it again. It's not that we try to, it's not that we strive to, but it's saying, okay, God, I failed. But my failure is not gonna define me. And then the final thing is this, is that your failures are a pattern that can be broken. You need to recognize what's causing those triggers in your life. What's causing those factors that are fueling your failure, and make those changes. It might very well be the people that you're hanging out with. It might very well be that at the end of a long week, you're like, I'm just gonna have a couple drinks, and then you pass out. It might be any number of things, but it's coming to the reality to say, listen, I recognize the pattern, and I'm gonna make sure that I don't go back into that. The scariest moment of my life happened when I was 16 years old. I was in a band. We weren't very good. but we'd played this friend's party. And we're driving home. And my friend had this old Audi. It was like this tank of a car. And we're in there and he's driving, I'm sitting shotgun, and his brother, our bass player's in the back, and we got all this gear. We got drums and guitars and all this stuff, and we're driving. He's taking me home, and we live through these kind of back roads, and as he's taking me home, his brakes go out, and we're coming down this hill. And I'm like, Matt, what's going on? And he goes, the brakes aren't working. And we're in this tank. And I'm like thinking in my mind, it's okay, there's a guardrail in front of us. We had a 90-degree turn. I knew this road well, but there's a guardrail. We're gonna hit the guardrail. I don't know what's on the other side. I know there's a cliff. I don't know how far off the cliff is, but there's a guardrail. And as we get closer, we realize someone had removed the guardrail. And we go off the cliff. And it's dark. We're in the back country. I mean, it's dark. There's no street lights. And I just had this moment of thinking, this is how it ends, right? Like we're done for. We're going up in a ball of flames and glory and all those things. And it actually wasn't that bad of a drop. Good thing we're in this tank of a car and we land and we kind of have this moment, we're kind of looking at each other and it's like, you cool, everyone's cool, all right, we're good. And we climb out and we find this farmer's house and we knock on their door and we're 16, we're calling our parents, they're freaked out. The farmer said, yeah, someone just removed the guardrail last week, we don't know why. And here's the reality. We can't remove the guardrails in our lives. This is why church is so important for you. This is why being in community is so important for you. This is why accountability is so important, because it's the guardrails for our lives. It's the guardrails in our lives that are around us and surrounding us, that are checking in on us, that are making sure we don't go off the cliff. We might have an emergency, the brakes might go out, but we're not gonna go off the cliff. Don't remove the guardrails in your life. And if you've taken them down, get some up quick. Talk to a friend today after service and say, listen, would you be a guardrail in my life? Peter took down the guardrails of his life. Luke 22, verse 54, it says, and Peter followed at a distance. Peter should have been right there on Jesus' hip. He should have been right there as close to Jesus as possible when Jesus got arrested. Instead, what happens? He's following at a distance. He's watching from a distance. He put distance between himself and God. The greatest guardrail we could ever have is our relationship with God. The Holy Spirit speaking to us, leading us, guiding us. If there's some distance between you and God, make that distance back up. In a moment, I'm gonna pray, and I wanna encourage you, just if you need to say, I need to shore up that distance. I need to get back with God. I need to be right with God. I've got some things in my life that have put some distance between God and I. Deal with that today. Jesus' promise to Peter was that despite the fact that he would fail, and Jesus knew Peter was gonna fail, he still said, Peter, you're a rock. And on you, I'm gonna help build this thing called the church. And guess what? Peter, you're gonna fail, but the gates of hell itself is not gonna stop you. Mission Church, we're gonna have moments that we fail, but guess what? The gates of hell are not gonna stop us. We're gonna have moments that, listen, we miss it. We make mistakes, but the gates of hell are not gonna stop us. But we gotta face Jesus in the midst of our failures. We gotta deal with our failures. You gotta hear this today as I conclude. You sinned, but you're not a sinner. You got knocked down, but you're not knocked out. You made a mistake, but you're not a mistake. You failed, but you're not a failure. You are forgiven, and you are free. Would you bow your head with me today? Jesus, we thank you for what you did at the cross. You took all of our sins, past, present, future. And Lord, you took them upon your back so that we could go free, that we could be free people living in the greatest freedom that we could ever experience. And Lord, today I pray for any person that's here, any person that's online, that's dealing with a failure. that they're facing their failure dead on. And it feels like their failure, like mine with pornography, it felt like that failure is defeating them. And today I pray that you would give them a new